Marvel Snap's newest card, Viv Vision, is very powerful when you get her to work, but she's asking so much of you that it might be a little bit hard to make sure that she's actually providing everything she can give. Viv Vision is a 3-2. At the start of turn, she checks to see if you're winning the lane she's in. If you are, she gives your entire hand an additional power. If you're not, she moves to another location. Now, you might think that that's the most important part of her text, but honestly, the most important part of her text is her power. 3-2, which is not very high and does require a fair amount of building around. If you're able to start her snowballing, she can be an extremely powerful card. Multiple buffs to the hand, once you start getting those, she will be a major contributor to wins. But the key part there is if you're able to get her to start snowballing. It's quite hard to make sure a 3-2 starts snowballing, and I think a lot of that is down to just how strong threes can be and the other contextual snowbally cards that we have access to. This card at 3-2 is powerful when it works. If it were a little bit stronger in terms of being a 3-3 or a 3-4, it would be Iron Patriot when it released level of power. And it's good that they avoided this pitfall at the time. Iron Patriot released before they really understood how the minigame of trying to win individual locations really played out in the early turns. On turn 2, it's very difficult to reasonably contest a lane because so many 3-drops are so powerful. A 3-5, for example, invalidates both a 1-2 and a 2-3. So if you have the 2-3 and the 3-5 in the same lane, you got to pick what lane that was, you're probably getting the Iron Patriot proc. Here, I think there might have been a bit of an overcorrection. 3 cost, because of the vast power spike that going from 2 to 3 represents, there are so many more bigger bodies at 3 cost. That is not true of going to 3 to 4. There are plenty of reasonably sized 4s, but none of them that are absolutely blowing the doors off of all the 3 drops the way 2s are relative to 3s. A Gladiator is actually a fairly respectable bit of point output for a 4-drop on its own body. Many 4-drops are build-arounds that are used for their effects, like Galacta and Gwenpool, as opposed to being cards that are set up to be able to individually win lanes at a specific point in time. What that means is that Viv Vision ends up being a little bit harder to make work than Iron Patriot was, and that's probably good. Iron Patriot was a card that basically went in everything and made every game about him because by virtue of being a turn early and the general way in which Marvel Snap has designed its 2s and 3s, it was very difficult to reasonably contest. It is much easier to reasonably contest a Viv Vision, in large part because it is a 3 cost and in large part because it only has 2 power. That is the major thing that makes this card a little bit iffy. Many people will look at this and say, oh, it's just going to clog me if I lose. And it's like, yeah, okay, in all the games I played with Viv Vision, Viv Vision, I was only really impacted that like 1 or 2 times. And it doesn't really seem like it's actually a major part of the card. It's the kind of thing that can be good and bad as opposed to just being purely bad. But what's actually the issue with this card, in as much as there is anything holding her back, is that there is simply not enough power on her to make it easy to get her good upside, as opposed to the release of Iron Patriot, where there was enough power on him and they needed to like minimize the upside. I think there's probably room for this character to get a little bit stronger, which is a risk when you really think about it, because this is a card that, if it ever is good, starts snowballing quite horrifically. This is not a card that seems particularly fun to play against. Imagine your opponent had an Iron Patriot and it just kind of went off every turn. You'd feel pretty bad about that. So I think they roughly got her at the right power level for long-term balance, but I think we'll have to wait and see if that actually is the power level they want this card to be at, because there's plenty of potential upward mobility. Even going to 3-3 would be a big boost to what this card is able to do, that being an extra point of power in the lanes that it's looking to win. Something like gaining the ability to move rather than moving randomly would additionally be a big boost, giving you more control over how you plan to deploy your Viv Vision. I think either of those are very viable potential paths forward for this card, and even at what it is, I am a little bit more intrigued than I think you would expect me to be by the massive potential that this card represents in terms of pure numbers. That said, right now, I think it's pretty similar to Galactus First Steps. There is definitely a good card in here, but you aren't going to find a lot of space for that card to succeed in the current context of the metagame. This was my favorite list that I played with Viv Vision, and it is a list that is focused pretty heavily on the Mysterio buff package. It's another iteration of the Cook. It came from Smiles. I modified it very slightly, but fundamentally what's going on here is just a turn 5 Mysterio deck with a bunch of different ways to make sure your turn 5 Mysterio is really stupid. The thing I ran into, though, is that whenever I had the choice, I felt like playing Silver Surfer First Steps into Galacta was dramatically stronger than trying to invest in a Viv Vision. And this is where we start talking about the gaps between 3s and 4s in terms of what their roles are in the game. It might sound weird, but there aren't a lot of build-arounds at 3. And I know there are obvious exceptions, cards like Silver Surfer and Cerebro that want to be played on turn 6, but there aren't really 3-cost Galactas for the most part, where these are cards that you fully build your strategy around. You want them on the board to accrue value turn over turn. Really, the only one of those that exists is Elsa Bloodstone, and Elsa Bloodstone was originally a 2 and got nerfed to being a 3. So I think it is notable that a lot of 3s tend to be much more just good stuff cards. A 3-5 with some upside. Copycat is sort of the model of a 3. Gladiator, a 3-8 with some downside. But they all have really good stats. And that is what made Iron Patriot so potent, is it released into a context where a 2 and a 3, whatever they were, basically Iron Patriot and any 3-5 to 3-8 with upside is going to trigger that Iron Patriot. And that's the context Iron Patriot released into. That context does not exist with current 4s. In fact, most 4s are not that big, because at 4, you start to get worried about if your 4 is too big, getting it invalidated by a Shang-Chi. So the biggest and best 4s tend to be in the 4-5 to 4-9 range, with Galacta and Gwenpool going on up to Misery. That makes it much harder, just the way 4s are in this game, to be a good Viv Vision deck. Because if you want to go above that, you're risking the Shang-Chi blowout later, which is very, very awkward. You can still be a good Viv Vision deck, but it doesn't necessarily involve playing big 4s right now. And that's how you end up feeling like 3-5 into 4-5 is just a better thing to be doing if you're trying to win these lanes. What's interesting about Viv Vision being 3, and it's sort of the point I've been trying to make this whole video, is that because of the difference between 3s and 4s, whether or not you're going to win a lane early is actually mostly dependent on your 3-drop. And because she's the 3-drop, she's not going to win a lot of lanes early because she's a 3-2. And that's the really interesting dynamic that she has to deal with right now. It's not necessarily a permanent state of affairs, but it does mean that even in a deck like this, which is built around her and trying to make her succeed, when she does succeed, she's amazing, but very often my risk-averse brain will vastly prefer, let's do Silver Surfer First Steps into Gwenpool instead, because that's kind of a similar amount of points a lot of the time, and it's just not carrying the same downside risk of when it doesn't work, I have played a 3-2. This is perhaps the single most boring Viv deck you could possibly play. I played it, and within 3 games, I was playing an exact mirror against Chamo because it's just sort of very obviously like what you would try to do with this card. Unfortunately, with this card, I ran into the same thing, which is if I'm going to play a 3-drop that really cares about winning, Silver Surfer First Steps at 3-5, allowing me to duplicate a Wiccan or something like that, is often going to be a better option. This is a deck that I feel like would probably prefer to have a 3 that wasn't Viv. Viv is fine here, but she is not doing as much work as you would expect her to do because there is no special way of taking advantage of her buffs. This is just a basic, boring Viv deck that is using Domino to make sure that you have a reasonable advantage. You play Domino on a lane that probably doesn't have anything in it. If your opponent guesses that lane, then you have to start thinking, but you can curve Domino into Viv a lot of the time. The problem is you kind of really want to be playing some of your other 3s too. Having to choose Viv over, say, getting a Mobius down against a deck that it might be relevant against, but if it is relevant, it will win you the game. If it's not relevant, it will be not a good thing. A lot of the time, you often end up defaulting to the Mobius. A lot of the time, you end up defaulting to the other 3s in this deck. And I think that's largely demonstrative of where Viv fits within this ecosystem as a generic card. 3s are carrying a lot of point weight in decks like this. There are certain slots devoted to tech, but the fact that even a Mobius is going to represent more points than her does put her in an awkward situation, because it's not like you have a lot of big fours to back her up. Your fours are fine, right? But like a 4-7 and a 4-6 are not the kind of things that can face down even a gladiator. And this is, again, where we circle back to the difference between 3s and 4s and the ways in which Viv Vision interacts here. I think that largely, if there is a miss on Viv Vision, it is in that context. The jump from 2s to 3s is massive. The jump from 3s to 4s, weirdly, is not, in terms of the value they represent on the board at the time. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic that I hadn't really put a ton of thought into, but playing Viv Vision has made me put a lot of thought into it for the first time in a couple of years. It used to be 4s were really stupid. They were the thing that was the biggest jump. 3s to 4s was such a big jump because 3s weren't very good. But then they made a ton of really good 3s, and now it's the reverse. All of the 4s are these sort of linchpin cards the decks are built around, where all of the power is in their effect and none of it is on the board. They're all about building for later turns, and all of the 3s are just cards with really big numbers on them. And that is mostly what Viv runs into in this context. I think this approach to Surfer is quite interesting. I don't know exactly how I feel about it. It does sort of seem like the kind of thing that shouldn't work. Like, this kind of deck building is largely in the realm of like, all right, there's no way the answer is this simple, is it? But it does actually have a pretty decent amount of juice to it when you can make the things happen that you want to happen. The issue you run into is like Wiccan largely conflicts with your other 4s. So if you do get the Wiccan curve, you end up doing a 4 and a 3, which is cool. But also it's like you kind of would have done that for a turn earlier and then played a 3. If you had, like, say, a Luna Snow in here, you would have done that 4 and then done, you know, a 3 and a 3. And it's like, I'm not really sure how much you're actually gaining. What you're gaining is largely in knowledge of where to allocate your points, which is valuable. I don't want to sit here and act like it isn't. But in a deck like this, Viv Vision has a lot of really good targets, but she mostly only goes off if she's able to be uncontested. And there are a couple other ways to approach Surfer stuff with, like, America Chavez, with Okoye, stuff like that. Like, America Chavez into a deck with a bunch of 2-drops can really get you active Vivs. And there's other builds of Surfer. We're going to talk about another one in a second here. But I think this one is one that probably bears exploration. I feel like it has a very high floor, but also in a world where people are playing a lot of combo decks, I don't really see the point in trying to build a Surfer deck that's just better at doing points. You are very good at doing points. Like, I saw someone drop an 18 power Sebastian Shaw on my face. Like, there are some big numbers to be found in a deck like this that are bigger than in a normal Surfer deck if you get this card going. But it does come with meaningful downsides, and while I do think this is a good way of getting this card going, I'm not sure the net loss to potential, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? Consistency. Because you're playing Wiccan, because you're playing Domino and Quicksilver, you end up drawing your Wiccan less than in a deck that isn't doing those things. And this is apparent in the other Wiccan deck as well, where you end up having a lot of games where you're just like, wow, why am I not drawing Wiccan? And it's like, well, because you're eating your own draws with Domino and Quicksilver, you're just less likely to have it. And I'm not sure that ends up being worth it. It might just be that one of them is okay, but the other one maybe isn't. And I'm interested to see where building in this direction kind of goes, because it's awesome that Quicksilver Domino is actually a thing. I've wanted that to be a thing forever, but I don't know if it's a good thing. I do think it's a thing with a pretty high floor, though, and so if you're looking for a consistent deck, this could be a good place to start. The non-Wiccan build of Surfer looks a lot more like this. It's just every buff card in the entire world, and it has all the same upsides and downsides that you would expect. Against decks that are not doing a combo endgame, what you can do with this deck will have you in every single game. This is a great deck in a metagame full of mid-range cards. Unfortunately, I'm not sure we're in that metagame right now, or at least long-term will be in that metagame. If you run into stuff like Hella, if you run into stuff like various combo decks of the lines of Mr. Negative, you're just going to sit there and look at what they're doing, and you're going to realize that it doesn't matter that you have massive output, they're probably going to win anyway. But I can really see a future for decks like this in a world where that is not necessarily the case. Like in a world where those decks get heavily policed out of the metagame by Stardust runners and things like that, I can absolutely see it. I think this is a very, very, very high power deck, but it can only exist in worlds where what matters is outpowering mid-range decks. It's almost like a soft combo deck is how I would describe it. This is a deck that is like trying to make things really, really big, play things that are the size of the Infinite, basically. It's kind of like a Red Wing deck, almost, in terms of how you actually want to be playing it. And I think that that level of deck is always going to be around, but will be contextually good or bad, depending on what else is happening in the metagame. Because, like, man, there are some really big numbers you can get to with Viv in this deck. But, man, there are some other decks that do really big numbers pretty well, and you might need some way to interact with them. I don't know who put this deck together, but it's straight out of 2023, and I absolutely love them for it. I saw a bit of this deck being played, and I just love this kind of deck. But it is very reliant on a couple of things. A couple of things that I want to point out about the way in which Viv Vision interacts with this deck. The first is Viv Vision interacts fairly profitably in the context of, oh, it's going to go to the Craven lane. That stuff's kind of cool. You have like your little backup Craven Silk thing. We used to play decks like this. Like I said, 2023-ass decks, where it was like the Craven Silk early game into like a Darkhawk Black Bolt late game. This is a blast from the past, and I'm really interested that it's been doing decently well here because it doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would, but disruption means that it very much can. The combination of disruption and power has always been relevant, and while this is the last deck on this list for a reason, I do want to highlight specifically that I am interested in the applications of Viv Vision in various Craven-based strategies. It's also notable that she does get absolutely housed by Scream-based strategies, which luckily are not necessarily super popular right now. All of that is to say, whoever made this, I love you. You need to travel forward to 2025, but I still love you. So where does that leave Viv Vision? I think it leaves her in a promising spot. One of the things that I've noticed is if Season Pass cards don't immediately break the game, a lot of people start calling them trash. And I don't really know how to square that circle, because when you look at Galactus First Steps, I think the large reaction was, I don't immediately need this to play any good deck, therefore it is trash. And I get it. Like, some Season Pass cards have been that level of good. But Galactus First Steps is quite a good card. Like, when you look at the group of big 6-drops, he's one of the best of them. And he's very, very playable and very, very solid. And yeah, if you don't have him, you can maybe replace him with Magneto or Hulkling or something like that. But he is one of the best of them, and he's probably a little bit better than those guys. And that's a card that I think a lot of people were like 5, 6, that has grown on me, right? I think Viv Vision maybe has similar potential. I think she's hard to make work, and I think maybe it's possible the conditions don't exist to make her work. But once you start getting like 2 or 3 procs, this card is insane. And I think that's probably the right place for her to be. Would I be surprised to see her buffed? I don't know. I do worry that if they buff a card like this, it could become ubiquitous and a pain in the ass in a really short amount of time. I think that locking the amount of power that she generates behind what she is, which is hard to activate, is relevant. And I do think that it's possible they misevaluated the ways in which 2s, 3s, and 4s are sort of disparate from each other with Iron Patriot comparisons, but I don't think she's that far off. I'm higher on her than I think a lot of my contemporaries in High Infinite are, but I do think that even they would admit that this is a card that, when it works, is quite strong. It just doesn't work all of the time or enough of the time to be a preferable option to the super high impact stuff like Silver Surfer First Steps into Wiccan or Gwenpool, right? That kind of stuff is sort of obviously a little bit better. I do kind of wonder about this card, though, because Iron Patriot was not a particularly amazing time to be playing, and the dynamics of this card, I like the overall shape of forcing people to play to the board. I don't know if I like the specific way in which Viv does it. Anyway, long story short, she's pretty good, but not a card you should feel like you have to own in order to play a top-tier deck. That's all I've got to say for y'all this time. I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. Let me know in the comments how you guys want me to cover the remaining cards that came out yesterday, because there's a ton of stuff to cover. Moira X and Sparky and the 2 Series 4s, and I can't make a video for each of them individually. Would y'all want a video for all of them or what? I'm not really sure. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I will see you in the next one.